story of my life. I'm gonna pee my pants. I'm so nervous. Hi. So there I was. I was sitting in Mrs. Small's class. I was 11 years old. Oh. I was 11 years old and I was sitting there and I was listening to her tell us about how if we had premarital sex, we were putting Jesus right back up on the cross and any number of horrible, guilt-ridden things. And she's telling us all of these things and I'm thinking, okay, well, I'm 11. Maybe someday I'll do that, but I had this awful secret and I had this terrible feeling in my stomach when she was telling us these awful things, and then a nun walked in the room. Sister Mary Robert came in her habit. She comes in and she talks to Mrs. Smalls. Mrs. Smalls looks at me. Sister Mary Robert looks at me. And I'm like, oh shit. What do they know? And Sister Mary Robert says, I need you to come with me. So there I go. I go with her and I go to the principal's office where Sister Constance is sitting. And Sister Constance was like 100 pounds, soaking wet, and had this wig that was just like a dead beaver. It was just like fucking horrible on her head. And I remember it so vividly, and I'm already so fucking scared, and then there she is with this wig, and I'm like, what is happening? And she says, you have a phone call. Hello? And it's my mother. And it's my mother at the height of her hysteria. What have you been doing? Which one? Like, I don't know. She couldn't possibly know. She couldn't, there was no way she could know. But she did. What she knew was that she'd gotten a phone bill. Which was over $1,000. Because in the course of a month, I had run up over $1,000 in 976 phone calls. For those of you who are too young to remember, 976 numbers were the $2.50 a minute calls that you made when you were 11 and it was creepy. So, basically, I don't remember how I learned about these things. I was 11, like how the fuck do you remember? But I do think that what happened was, I'd seen an ad on television, it was like, 976 joke, call for a funny joke. And I probably did that. But then I was like, well, what if I change joke to love? Or fuck? Or slut? Or blow? Or gays? Or homo? Or any four-letter word that could possibly work, I fucking tried. What can I do? What is this? So, I would call obsessively. And I don't know where they were. But like my parents, I lived in suburban Redwood City. Give it up for the peninsula. Woo! I lived in suburban Redwood City with my mom and my stepdad, and they were sort of yuppies, and they were smoking pot when I was sleeping. Like they were fine, but like they weren't paying attention clearly because I was like, hello. And it wasn't a thing where you talked to anybody. It was a thing where you would call and you would listen to a recording. And it was like, hi, this is Anne-Marie, your flight attendant for flight 767. And in the back we have the Mile High Club, and oh, my pussy's so wet, and no. And then it was like the naughty housewife, and then it was like the gay bathhouse, and I was learning all kinds of things that I had never even really imagined before. And they were all making these beautiful, crazy noises. and I was making them too, and it was like, what is happening to my body? And I'm gonna touch that, because that feels good while this is happening, and like, crazy town, like constantly just like, oh, this is awesome, like, I want to be a stewardess when I grow up. And here's the thing, like, so my mother gets this phone bill, and she's like, what the fuck? Either my daughter has been diddled by someone, or she's just a fucking pervert, and either way, this is not good. And so, I got sent to therapy, because what else do you do? I figure if I was a boy, they would have been like, but that's not what happened, so they sent me to therapy. And, I talked to the therapist about the phone calls, and I, like, played in the sand tray, and I touched the doll where I touched myself, because no one had ever touched me except myself. So I was like, right here, that's what's going on, right there. So, she determined that, I was fairly normal. However, so, I mean, just reassure you, like, no one had, like, molested me in any way. Like, I was just a pervert. And the only other sexual information that I'd gotten was, I asked my mom where babies came from, and she was like, okay, here's what happens. And I was like, well, what does it feel like? And she's like, it feels like putting on a glove. That's not what it sounded like when I called. I had put on a glove before, and that had not happened. So I was like, you're lying. And the other information I had was my parents had a coffee table book called Erotic Art of the Masters, and I had somehow like rifled through their shit and found it. And it was exactly what you think it was. It was like all of these like beautiful lithographs and paintings and whatever of like ancient sex acts and Kama Sutra and all this shit. And I was like, that looks fun. And then I was like, oh, I get it. I can see it, hear it, and this is all coming together, and this all makes sense. And the thing is, like, I didn't know much other than this book and this phone and this inherent sense of myself. I was able to bring myself to orgasm without actually knowing what that was when I was 6. It just felt, yeah, I know, it's great. It just felt good, and like I was like, oh, cool, I'll just keep doing that. So, do you guys remember My Little Pony? Any bronies in the audience? If you don't know what that is, you should look it up, because it's kind of funny. Anyway, so My Little Pony had a seahorse cousin called My Little Seahorse. And I called it, well, I didn't call it that, but I call it that now, My Little Dildo. Now, there was never any penetration because I didn't know what that was when I was 6. But I did know that if I laid down on top of it and I rubbed up against it, it felt amazing. So I've always just been someone who was aware of and comfortable with my sexuality before I even knew what that was. So these phone calls kind of made sense in the scheme of things. So the therapist determines, just kind of a pervert, but, no harm done, she's fine. But I am, meanwhile, completely humiliated. Not only that, but because I've been found out, I'm devastated. I've disappointed my parents, I've completely humiliated myself, but more importantly, it's fucking over. I can't make these phone calls anymore. What the hell am I gonna do? I had long since given away My Little Ponies. I don't know who got them, but Jesus. Like, it was over. And I was so devastated by this loss. Like, I felt a real sense of loss. So, about 6 months later, after this intense therapy and all this other stuff, I'm at a party with my parents at their friend's house, Richard and Pam. And Richard and Pam were like my parents' cool friends. They lived in this really cool, like, minimalist house, and they were artsy, and she had like a very asymmetrical haircut. He was British, and it was all very cool. And I was like, ooh, I love them. And we were at this party at their house, and the coolest thing about their house was there was a phone in the bathroom. I made so many trips to the bathroom that night. I ran up $300 in phone calls. So a month later, my parents get a phone call, and like who knows what they said, but I was fucking busted again. So I had to go back to Richard and Pam's house to like clean their house to work off the $300. And I can only imagine what they're doing in the other room. They're like, oh my God, this is fucking hilarious. Because it's funny if it's not your kid, right? Look at that little pervert scrubbing the kitchen floor. The phone was still there. They didn't take it off the hook or anything. I didn't make any phone calls. But like, I just didn't care. I was like, I need to make a phone call. 976 fuck is calling my name. Oh my God. So I cleaned their house and I worked it off. And he still gives me shit about it to this day. You're such a little pervert, you know. And he's not wrong. So years later, I'm 17, I'm still a virgin, but I'm still like kind of a pervert, and I meet this friend of mine who was 25 at the time, and he became sort of my sexual, spiritual mentor. And because I was a virgin, we used to have a lot of phone sex, which involved him telling me stories and me just making noises because I couldn't say. It took me 6 months to say the word pussy without laughing. I was like, pussy. Like I couldn't do it. It was terrifying to me. But eventually I became more participatory in my phone sex adventures, and every now and then I would still make an anonymous phone call to a certain line and have a little anonymous phone sex. And I guess I just never got over it. And that's my dirty little secret.